Harper and Phillip Hamilton. They are a part of the Anti-Racism Coalition here at Cazenovia, ARC-C, and hopefully we will have dialogue here about post-election, about the past 4 years, and hopefully what our aspects are for the next 4 years. And at the end, we'll kind of talk about our local elections and our local officials, the impacts, the perspectives that we have, hopefully the positives and challenges that we're having as well. And so I'd like to introduce Dara here. Go ahead, Dara. Let us know who you are and reasons for founding ARC-C and the impact you hope you have.
Thank you, Katiuska, and thanks for having us tonight. This is really wonderful. My name is Dara Harper. I have lived in Cazenovia for 13 years. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky originally, and we moved from Louisville to Denver and then Denver to Cazenovia. So all those places are really different. And when I first got to Cazenovia, I was a little confused about the community, right? It's really small. It's far away from the things you generally need to get to. And it was very noticeable that there were not a lot of people of color in this community. I'll move into a different situation or a different idea now, is that I also am a yoga instructor. I have been a yoga instructor for 25 years. I also work in communications in Syracuse at the Central New York Community Foundation. And back to the anti-racism work. In March, when George Floyd was murdered, it became very aware to so many of us at the same time that there's no way that we couldn't do the work, right? That was what happened. It was, you couldn't ignore anything anymore. And we were all stuck, right? We all had just been sent home from work and just allowing ourselves to figure out what COVID life meant. And then to have such an atrocity filmed and in front of us really changed the playing field. So while I know that Cazenovia, our permanent residents are for the most part white, I think that there's good work to be done to integrating our community. And it is very important that Cazenovia College students are taken into account for safety, for feeling comfortable. And I think it's, you can correct me, Katiuska, it's like 30% people of color at Cazenovia College. So there are a lot of people here who would appreciate rewriting of policy, talking to the police department, talking to the sheriff's department, having Congress people who know that they're here and watching each other like a village does, right? We are integrated into each other's lives naturally in a small village, and we want to do that same thing with Cazenovia College students. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. And can you just remind our viewers and myself the founding date of the organization, ARC-C?
I don't know. I think maybe maybe May was when we finally pulled things together to where we realized it needed to be more organized. I got a call one morning from a mom who found out from another mom. Her daughter really wanted to have a gathering to protest the murder of George Floyd in front of Common Grounds, where you're sitting. And on that day, Phillip and his wife and his mom came driving by, and they stopped, and then they got out, and then we had, it was amazing, like a call from a call from a call, and then we had 25 people out there. The next thing that happened was we had a 400-person march through town for Black Lives Matter. And while it was mostly white people, right? Everybody was horrified at what was happening. And after that, we realized that we had work to do. Like, we have to rewrite policies, right? We have to get the right elected officials in office. Yeah, does that help?
It does. It really does. It's just a good notion to know that it is relatively new. However, the fact that y'all were able to get over 400 people to do a march, which before I was here as a new employee, I was able to see it. And I was amazed at the fact that a community that is predominantly white and Caucasian was able to be allies for our students, our staff, our faculty, our residents of Cazenovia of color was very impactful for me. And I understood that Cazenovia does have the potential to continue being allies to everyone who is of color. And so it was just amazing to see that. So thank you for just being able to support someone who needed to advocate their frustration or their feelings of that day, and then connect with one another and support them and validate that feeling. So I'm so happy that y'all were created. And so now to Phillip, who is a member of Anti-Racism Coalition. Phillip, please let our viewers know a little bit about yourself and the reason why you continue to be a member of the Anti-Racism Coalition here.
Absolutely. Good evening. My name is Phillip Hamilton. I joined ARC-C actually at the prompting of Dara back in May of, in the spring of 2020, this spring. I am going on 29 years as a resident of the village of Cazenovia. And some of the people watching this might be interested in knowing that amongst a few colleges that I have been associated with, I am an alum of Cazenovia College, class of 1996. Yeah, so I actually spent some time there. During my time in Cazenovia back in the 1990s, I spent about half of my time at Syracuse University, but I certainly recall fondly my experiences at Cazenovia College. On a personal note, my wife is also an alum of Cazenovia. So she was there. We were not there at the same time. We were adjacent. She graduated in 93. I came in 93 and graduated in 96 with my bachelor's from Caz. So I'm employed by the State University of New York, Morrisville State. So that's the local SUNY. In adult education, I direct the college preparatory program in the city of Syracuse. So my office is at our Syracuse campus. In the over 28, 29 years that I've been a resident of Caz, as a small town, Caz is quite insular and quite parochial, meaning people keep to themselves. They're not particularly outgoing with new people. There's good and bad to that. What I can tell you though is that generally the people are good-hearted, good-spirited. But like most people, if they don't know you and you're the other, you're unfamiliar. Demographically, Cazenovia has pretty much been the same since the early 90s when I got here. And I'm talking about the village at this point. Overwhelmingly white. The last time I checked, the village was somewhere in the neighborhood of 95% white. And that has not changed. When I attended Cazenovia College, the demographic for people of color was somewhere around 22% to 95, 96. So it sounds like that's changed a little bit there's trending upwards. I can also tell you that the perception of both my employer, Institution of Higher Learning, and Cazenovia College of the village around each institution is that there are more people of color than they're actually there. And I think that that's significant because the village has this erroneous belief that there are, that the college is dominated or that there are more people of color up there.
Mm.
And more at Morrisville in particular, and I think to a lesser degree Kaz, but I do know that that sentiment exists here. Um, that bothers me because I can see it. I'm one of the few people who can see it from both sides, and I'm singular as being a person of color in Cazenovia who can see that. So because there are not very many people of color here. George Floyd, that was a singular event, and that definitely prompted me to want to um, make a difference personally, locally. All the time that I've been here, whether it's in graduate school and I come back for holidays, or whether I was going to college here, or I was always based here, and it never occurred to me that I could personally make a difference or that I should. I mean, this town is over 225 years old, and how is one middle-aged African American, educated or not, man, Southern born, raised in the Midwest, living in the in the Northeast, going to make a difference. Noticing that the population of Cazenovia cared enough to hit the streets, to make their voices heard, touched me enough that I brought my family to some of these demonstrations, and I thought it was important that we be seen and that we added our voice to the chorus of voices of the village and the town. In the time that I've lived here, things happen slowly here, glacially even, but I think this was a catalytic event. George Floyd, generally where the law enforcement has disenfranchised people of color on television, international television live, that really has quite a bit to do with it. So when I moved here in 1992, that was not so much of an issue because it was not so public. But when you see somebody in broad daylight, in an urban setting, helpless, and prone underneath the knee of a police officer, and he later dies in custody, that's difficult to explain away. And I think that touched enough people that people felt like they had to say something, and I wanted to be a part of that. Not only did I want to be a part of that, but I think with ARC-C, it gives me the opportunity to not only feel empowered, but it gives me hope that the people around me aren't necessarily selfish or don't care, or so self-absorbed that they don't care about anybody else, that other is not less than. And especially in a small town like this, it's important because you are going to stand out no matter where you go, and you're going to be a known commodity no matter what you do. But as long as people understand that, you work hard, you're ambitious, that you want to live your life and with dignity and make sure your family is safe. That's all we all want, and we all deserve those things. So that's it.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being vulnerable and letting us know your reasons for joining and still staying. I will say that the Anti-Racism Coalition was able to invite me to some meetings before voting on the election. And the day of election, I was able to vote. And I was a little fearful. As a Latina here at Cazenovia, very new, didn't really have too much of a support system here to be comfortable to voting, to be honest. I knew I had my department and my staff and colleagues, but I did, in the back of my mind when I went to vote, I did say to myself, if something does happen to me, I can go to Dara and say something. So I just want to let you both know that it empowered me to know I have a support system in a way. And I think that's key when helping staff, students, individuals of color just to know someone's got your back, someone who might not look like you or understand the experiences you have gone through, but still cares enough to be an ally. So thank you so much for that. And so to transition about post-election, I do would like to know y'all's input a little bit of our past 4 years. And I think it's been crucial and critical to talk about the past 4 years, given that we do officially, unofficially know about who our president-elect will be for the next 4 years. So how has the past 4 years with the current presidency of Trump and their administration impacted you, whether it's personally or job related or overall society? If you can let our viewers know some of your input on that.
Phillip, do you want to go first?
Okay. For some reason, an anecdote comes to mind and that I'll share with you, and it precedes the election of President Obama before he took office in 2009. We have 2 golf courses here in Caz, the Country Club and the Golf Club. The Golf Club is the one that's over on Route 92. The Country Club is behind my house here. I'm going south. I was at the Country Club. Now, this was probably 2005, something like that, 2005. Now, I was playing with a group of people, only person of color. The group behind us, I was actually coming up behind, and the group behind us mistook me for one of the workers, apparently, because they were asking me to come run and go do this and go do that, and I'm kind of confused. I did understand it, once I understood what was going on, I was quite miffed, and they were very embarrassed. Now, fast forward to last year. I'm on the same golf course, and it's interesting because not only was I treated with respect, I felt almost treated with reverence. And that was interesting to me because I didn't know the people, but they knew me. They knew where I worked. They knew pretty much what I did, where I lived. That was a little unnerving. But it's a small town like this. And one of the things that I think is a political byproduct of the Trump era is that people take a closer look at who you are for what you are, as opposed to in a threatening way to a certain point. Now, if someone is politically disposed to believing that you are other, believing that you are less than, believing that people of color, that Latinas shouldn't be here, and I have met people in this town that believe these things. They're going to believe that, but what has been that positive byproduct is that it has impulsed people to look within and decide what kind of person they are, what kind of person they want to be, how they treat people, with more dignity than perhaps they have. I felt like I have gotten greater space, especially since Obama's first inauguration, leading all the way up to Trump. Now, I will say that there are people out here, and I have run into them, but fewer than I thought, that will, tell me they voted for Trump. Most people who vote for Trump keep it kind of on the DL when they speak to me. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. But partially is, again, they do know what I do. As an academic, I'm difficult to argue with successfully. And so I'm given kind of a wide berth like that. But there are people who are indoctrinated that feel empowered to let you know how they feel or how they think things are. I think that's more accurate. Reality is not always what you're going to find on Parlay or from a QAnon site, or Fox News or Glenn Beck. And there are quite a few people out here like that. So the election has pushed kind of a divergent population to the fore, both people who really have looked within themselves and didn't like how they have been, and they really have made the effort, and there's a lot more than just the election. I think some of that has to do with human nature. I mean, people want to understand generally. I believe that. And then there, of course, there are the people who are ideological, who feel like this is all I have. Perhaps it's all I can hang on to, so I have to find something to help myself to feel better. So I feel like I've kind of seen those divergent paths, especially here in a small town. It's really right here, present.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that insight. And yes, you are correct on many people do have it as an ideology, and others have it as their parents or family voted for Trump, and that's why. There's no understanding of policies or reason behind it, but it's just their values are to vote for that individual. And so it's, for me, I guess, I've noticed the same thing as you have, that more have been more confident saying who they voted for and standing strong, which I think for me has been a positive now that I know what they value and who they value. And it's helped me understand who I need to continue associating myself with and who I'm okay with just staying Facebook friends or, distant Instagram friends type thing. So I appreciate that. Dara, would you like to give us some of your input?
I think it's hard to sum up how the past 4 years have been. I remember that right off the bat, I read something that we should write down how things are right now, because they won't be the same in a few years, and we'll forget. We'll forget what other presidents were like, right? And one thing that is really important to me is that we need to get back to a place of being civil with each other, right? Because there came a time where, and it started really with Obama, and I think it was really social media stuff where people started to really like badger each other into a corner. And I don't think it helps any that we elected a reality TV show president, so he was accustomed to being in a position that appeared as if he had power on a television show. And then he comes into power with, basically no political stance. He was a Democrat for a while. Then he became a Republican. I think he flopped around a little bit. But we went to, I've only been to one inauguration, and I'm going to say that my husband has already said that we are not allowed to go to this one. And I'm still fighting with him about that, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to lose that one because of the pandemic. But the one inauguration I have been to was Donald Trump's inauguration day. And I like to tell people that I went to inauguration day and the Women's March. So inauguration day was very weird, and we were staying kind of out, and I said to the taxi driver, just try to get us as close to the International Spy Museum as you can. and like just as close as you can. I know where that is. So like if you just get us there and know where we can go. And he just drove right up to the Spy Museum and dropped us off. It was no big deal. The next day, Women's March, packed with people. Like we couldn't get within a mile of the International Spy Museum. So it gives you an idea of like Spy Museum is really close to the White House, right? And so on Inauguration Day, we were part of the Black Lives Matter march that marched in front of the White House. And then the next day, I don't know where we marched. We were so jam packed with a whole bunch of people. So there was a small amount of people on Inauguration Day who were like in their MAGA hats and really pushing their agenda in a very, very, Washington, D.C., I think, Phillip, you might know, I think it's like 2% Republican, like the whole city and district is Democratic. So no one in DC was pulling for this. And then all of a sudden, here's some people drop in. And then the next day it was jam packed with a whole bunch of people, men and women and children. And everybody was like, oh, excuse me, sorry, thank you. Oh, please help me. Oh, and it was amazing. So I think that we have hope now to move into a place where we have a president who we can connect in with, and again, we said a little bit about we were going to go into local elections. The local people are the people who you can really get in touch with, right? But with the president being a moderate kind of open-minded Democrat, and then the vice president standing for justice and reason more so than what we've had, we have a good chance at balancing the scales, right? He's not the most liberal Democrat. He's a moderate, like even keel, balanced, wants to work with people president. And I think that will behoove us because we really need a lot of mending and healing.
Yes, and to segue onto the coming 4 years of hope, which is something that we did have with our former president, Barack Obama, for the 8 years. How do you anticipate Biden and his administration with our Vice President-elect Kamala Harris to impact you personally and in society? How do you anticipate that the 4 more years coming? Like, I'll give you an example. For me, it's very much about immigration. Like I said, I'm Latina, I'm from Ecuador. I support our dreamers, our DACA students, our undocumented families. And that is one thing that I'm hoping for. There is an impact, but I know that everyone identifies differently and identifies with a different policy. So I'm wondering for y'all, what is it that you hope is impacted for the next 4 years?
One thing that comes to mind actually has a bit to do with my job. And I need to go back to the past 4 years to get to where we are, to make this resonate for you. At my work in adult education, I deal with adults. And all of our adults are either at or below the poverty level. And most of them have families. So they've got a commitment and obligations outside of their academic work. So that means they've got children. These children have seen over the past 4 years about how not to do things. Okay, corruption, nepotism, whether they can pronounce it, they know it's wrong. But they see this and they think it's the way to do things. One of the issues that has kept me up at night is where are we going to be and how difficult is it going to be to bridge that chasm from a transactional, selfish uh, chief executive to a more open and inclusive chief of executive who sees diversity as a virtue. It's not all about Joe Biden. It's not all about Kamala Harris. It was all about Donald Trump. That's why we are where we are right this moment in terms of getting on with the transition. It's all about him. And kids see that. So in 5 years, whether Joe runs again or not, I am keenly aware that there is a generation of young people that are going to wonder, what was that? Was that a one-off? Is that how to do it? Because he was so successful. Well, success is relative and possibly short-lived, based on what's going to happen after January 20th with him. We will find out how successful he has been. All things are not equal. Certainly they were not for Donald Trump. Now, Joe Biden, on the other hand, is the quintessential up by the bootstraps kind of guy. He was in the United States Senate for almost 3 decades. And one of the things that I can say, and I appreciate about him, is his evolution as a politician and as a person. In the 4 years that I have watched President Trump, I can't recall him saying, "I'm sorry" for anything. I do recall on 3 very concrete examples when Joe Biden said, "I was sorry." One of them was Anita Hill. I saw him do that. Okay. He knew that he didn't do enough, even though he was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in 1991 during her confirmation hearing. And I watched that just like every I was a younger adult like everybody else did. I watched that. I also watched him say that he was sorry to Kamala Harris. Okay. Can you imagine Donald Trump taking someone who took him to school on national and international live TV and making her, his running mate? Never would happen. It has to be a sycophant. It has to be someone who is entitled to Trump. And to tie this to the next 4 years, that kind of coalition, that kind of teamwork is going to be necessary across the Democratic progressive spectrum. It's going to have to be across the racial and ecclesiastical spectrum as well. That's the only way that I think that we can all move forward equally and not leave anybody behind. That's kind of a lesson that has been lost. Okay, it's not always about me all the time. How much can I get? I've got to get mine. That lesson, we've seen that. It doesn't work in a nation of 320 million people. There are just too many different types of people coming from too many different places, and we all have imperatives that are important to us. It is not just enough to be white and a male. Okay, that's not adequate enough. That is not enough. You have to be competent. You have to listen to others. Then you have to act on what you do. And I think what I saw in Joe Biden as he's progressed in his political career is just that. I don't mind telling you that I was in college in 1988, and I saw him drop out of the race for president because he plagiarized a speech on several occasions. I watched him do it once even. I didn't know it at the time until some very astute people in the press called him on it, and so he had to drop out. He also had medical issues. So I come to Joe Biden truthfully as a skeptic. But over time, and it has taken a long time, He really pushes a lot of the buttons that we need as a country to be assuaged. We can no longer build walls. Okay, we can no longer throw people in cages, separate them from their parents. We can no longer grab women by their private parts and laugh about it. We can no longer lie to the American people incessantly and get away with it because the law allows it. Okay, that does not move us forward as a people. We have been a laughingstock in the in the international community, and I think that changes. I think there's a collective sigh of relief when you look at the EU and most of the Asian and Latin American countries, because they didn't know how to deal with Trump. You know, unless you're a strong man, you know, unless you're Turkey, North Korea, or Iran, or Venezuela, if I remember it correctly. Most everybody else has been dealing with him with kid gloves because they didn't know how long he was going to be around. They didn't understand, except that as they pretty much could get what they wanted. So I think that time is over. Yeah, why don't I just stop there?
Thank you for all that. And yes, to our viewers, you know, this is one person's perspective, but to bring facts, to bring policy, to bring the impact of potential policies that have been done. I know we mentioned COVID, and hopefully we'll talk about that as we are all dealing with COVID. And it's important to note that, again, the views of our current president are for everyone to have. It's validating everyone's point of view. And so thank you, Phillip, for those comments. I could not agree with you more on that for sure. And thank you for bringing the aspect of adult education. I certainly is something that I take for granted as a student myself, but it must be difficult for the new generation and the current generation to see a role model that is supposed to be our president. I've always been brought up that, you know, the president is a role model for everyone. And certainly that's been up for discussion for us for the past 4 years. And as, like I said, I'm Latina. In Latin countries, some presidents are dictators without the dictator title. And so they aren't role models. So it's been something that I've been aware of. And just never expected the US to have that. And so enough about my opinion here. I will bring it back to Dara and your opinion on hopefully what you hope the next 4 years will impact you and society.
So I knew about this question right before I was here in this moment, and I started writing down things. I was like, oh yeah, and I got to add this, and I got to add that, and it ended up with like a laundry list of the very first things that need to happen. Right. So top on my list was the climate crisis. So there's a lot that needs to happen to protect our environment for our people, right? Next is bringing in the right people for the jobs in the cabinet of the president, right? Because what we know about Donald Trump is that he found a loophole in that he doesn't have to hire and vet someone if he hires them in a temporary status for a position. So any of these top jobs, he can hire whomever, and they don't have to be vetted the same way that they would if they were going to keep that job for a long time. That makes them irresponsible hires. Immigration, right? And abolishing ICE. And, you know, Phillip already mentioned immigration problems down on the border with children in cages and being taken away from their parents. Then I got into the abolish idea. So then I got into abolishing the Electoral College, right? Because the popular vote should win the presidency. I read somewhere it was like, maybe those people in the 19th century who are a bunch of white men didn't have the right idea. Like maybe we need to rethink electoral college and the way it works. Then I got into redistricting for voting because that is called gerrymandering. And you've probably heard the word, and I love etymology. And gerrymandering comes from, I think, a judge named Elbridge Gerry. And he decided he wanted to redraw the lines so that he could get the votes where he wanted them. And when he redrew it, it looked like a salamander. So he renamed it gerrymandering, right, after himself plus salamander. So we need um, to elect the right people in states so that they can redraw those districts so that it's not so skewed, because Republicans have been very efficient in drawing those lines the way they want them. Militarization of police, right? We need to put a kibosh on why are these military vehicles and fatigues and military type weaponry coming into small towns. That doesn't make sense. We don't need that.
Or big towns.
Or big towns like Portland, like what's happening, right? This is in the United States of America where I know what is to be true, right? And it's not anymore. But then here's what happened. After I wrote all that down, I was like, that's all about fighting racism. Because when you look at all those things, right? If we have an environmental crisis, who's going to suffer the most? With bringing the right people in for the jobs, who's going to suffer the most if we have ineffective leaders? Militarization of police, who's going to suffer the most, right? It's all going to be disproportionately affecting people of color and people who don't have money, right? So if you are poverty level at all, we're looking at some issues with the way that things are run on a local level, on a national level, and on a global level. So we really need to put, if racism is kind of an umbrella over all those things, fighting racism will shift the way that we manage all these other topics. And so I don't know, I can, if you want me to expound upon that, why I think that, but I feel like you do. And I have this great, you can look this up. This woman, Nicole, writes this blog called the Anti-Racism Daily. So she sends a daily email, and every day she says, you need to do this, right? So she is part of the reason that I look at this in this way, because every day she sends me an anti-racism email that talks about the environment, militarization of the police, knowing your terminology, how to connect with people from across the board.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I know that you touched upon some of the local elections, local procedures, just because, yes, we all that are eligible to vote hopefully did vote this election. And that's a lot of pressure on the president and the administration. But what can we do locally, right? And some of the aspects that you, Dara, and Phillip talked about can be impactful here locally. And so I'll bring it back to Cazenovia and our county, Madison County. And for y'all, a question is, what are some strengths and challenges that you want to talk about within Madison County, or some perspectives you want to bring awareness to our viewers and educate them on, and myself here, as I'm learning that within the county, there are different perspectives of how policies are administered, but also who voted individuals into the positions that they're in, and who has a say in what and how they're supposed to proceed with these policies. I learned this year that we, the people here, residents, elect our sheriffs. And so that is impactful for me because now I'm going to make sure that I have more information, more education on what is being done here, specifically within our police department. Just because as a person of color, I want to make sure I feel safe. I want to make sure that if I do have a family here and reside here, that they will also be children of color, and so to be safe here. So just bring it back to y'all on what is your perspective, or what would you like to bring our viewers aware of within the community we currently live in.
Keeping in mind that Cazenovia is, for all intents and purposes, if you want to characterize it, purple. When I moved here, I'll be honest, I really felt that it was much more red than it is today. And after having lived here, I feel that things have really mellowed out and turned a darker shade of purple, meaning that there are more Democrats here than there used to be. When we start talking about public officials, I'll start at the top with Anthony Brindisi. Okay, he's the presently serving House of Representatives person. He's a Democrat from in the Utica area that services us here in Kaz as well. Right this moment, they are in the process of counting absentee ballots to find out if Representative Brindisi is going to be able to keep his job. Now, this particular individual, Representative Brindisi, is very pro-labor. He is very pro-farmer, and generally is very progressive. He's a favorite of mine because he allowed me, as a young educator, to take some students up and meet him in Albany before when he was a state senator. So I really have a warm spot for him, and hopefully he'll be able to pull this out. Rachel May is the state senator who recently was reelected for our area, also very progressive, and is very pro-worker, which really I think is an excellent thing, and pro-education. We're very lucky here. Speaking of which, as an educator, I think we should all count our lucky stars. Education is a premium here, and politicians like Anthony Brindisi and Rachel May make it a priority to keep education, whether it's primary, secondary, or even higher education, in the forefront of legislation. And one thing that Dara can also speak to is that we were talking recently about Madison County Sheriff Todd Hood. Of course, he's an elected official. Recently publicized that he's not going to enforce the national or New York State executive order that prohibits gatherings over 10 people. He's going to allow the people of Madison County to their own devices and make their own choices, which I think is beyond arrogance, beyond dangerous. If he wants to legislate, he should run for Rachel May's seat or for Governor Cuomo's seat. Those people, it appears to me, are advised by world-class public health officials in epidemiology and virology. Governor Cuomo is not a virologist, but he is advised by the best in the galaxy. So why does this particular public official, whose job it is to enforce policy, enforce the law, all of a sudden decide to abrogate the law because he, for his reasons, chooses not to? I think it's very dangerous, and it's difficult. So that's a local official that I think we should perhaps keep an eye on.
Well, I love to vote. I vote every chance I get for anybody, any election I get to vote for. So I vote for Board of Education. I vote for the town board here, like in our town, the village board. We have lots of people, right, who can help direct the other higher up elected officials, right? So if I have a voice to help elect even the low people on the totem pole, I don't know if that's appropriate, scratch that, right? If I can help like get those people in office, then they can help strong arm the people ahead of them or above them. So I think that the main thing is to really stay educated on where you have the power to vote. And this year, right, we had more voters turn out for the presidential election than ever in history, right? Is that true, Phillip?
Yes. Not in history.
So,
Not in history.
not in history.
Not in history. But for the past 100 and some years, yeah.
Okay. So that's a lot. But Republicans turn out to vote and Democrats turn out to vote. So we have to keep making sure that everyone is voting, right? Not just one side and not just the other, because it's going to create an imbalance. And a lot of people in New York State have said, oh, why bother? We're a blue state. It might not matter how I vote as a person because of the Electoral College, that this state will be blue whether or not I vote. But down ballot, right? And all those little weird elections that happen, those all make a difference too. And so being able to vote for Brindisi, being able to, I knocked on doors and called people 2 years ago when he ran. He has to run every 2 years. That's not a very long term that he has where he has to start campaigning again. And then there are more and more people along the line who will make a difference. And yeah, I think that's get into voting. Make it a party. You get to vote, you get a sticker. If they ran out this year, but they said the reason they ran out is because they had 835 people the day before. They didn't have any more stickers. And I said, I'm cool with that. Like, because we need lots of people who are civically engaged. Why? Because now we have a new president and a new vice president coming in. They can thank Black voters from Georgia, from Pennsylvania. They can thank Indigenous voters in Arizona and Nevada. They owe the collective United States, the people of the United States, to listen to what they need from this administration, because they work for us, but they only work for us if we speak up.
Agreed on that. And I appreciate you bringing up our Indigenous people and our Black people as well for voting. And I do want to give another shout out to our Latino voters, our Latinx voters who were able to come out and vote as well. Phillip, I know you did bring up COVID, and so I would like to segue on that. Currently, like you mentioned, the new executive order from Governor Cuomo saying that within the holidays that we're about to have or currently are experiencing, families and residential individuals should not have gatherings more than 10 people. And like you mentioned, our Madison County Sheriff said that he won't ticket or follow that executive order in some summary. Can you give our viewers who may be students here at Cazenovia College, maybe residents here, at Cazenovia or just around the world, because YouTube is worldwide, global, how important is following COVID rules? And maybe it's not important for y'all, and that's okay to talk about. But as from the discussion we've been having, it seems that it is important. It is something that has factually and statistically been unfortunately killing many people as well. Most have been um, underrepresented minorities and people of color and people of communities that are marginalized and low income. It has impacted myself, but if you could tell the viewers how important it is from your aspect.
Absolutely. Um, First of all, just to piggyback on something that you just said about people of color and marginalized communities, um, virulent disease that negatively impacts urban areas typically impact people of color and marginalized communities greater than anyone else. Um, People who are living at or below the poverty line or who are living paycheck to paycheck um, have to make crisis management decisions on a daily basis. And now, on top of that, you've got to deal with a biological virulent virus. Um, and just to shout out to Cazenovia College, I did quite a bit of my undergraduate biology work at Caz. So just wanted to put that out there to anybody who's watching. Um, when I was uh, at the School of Public Health in Albany getting my MPH, one of the things that I noticed, because Albany is, by American standards, an older American city in the Northeast, it's pretty condensed. And the influenza in a place like that just spread like wildfire. Okay. COVID-19 consequently, a biological agent 4 to 5 times as virulent as the common influenza. As we all know, in March, April, and May, burned through the 5 boroughs and the downstate counties of New York. And there's not very much we could do about it. Okay? The present administration told us that it came from Asia. Well, actually, as far as the East Coast, it came from Europe. So it's very, very important to understand the reservoir, where something comes from, and the vector, how something is transmitted. Some of those questions have been answered in terms of the reservoir. The vector, not so much. We also know that vaccines are on the way, but we need to understand the reality of distributing a vaccination to 320 million people. Okay, there's going to likely be a staggered process where frontline healthcare workers and law enforcement will get it first. And of course, there will be a tendency for some people to not necessarily trust the virus or the vaccine, which is understandable. But you still absolutely should practice your social distancing, and you absolutely should wear your mask. It's not necessarily to protect yourself, but to protect your neighbors and others. We are likely to see an uptick, even here in the village, perhaps even on campus, of the virus as activities will be moving indoors and people will be in close quarters. It's also, we should probably talk a little bit about virus fatigue. People get tired of having to socially distance and not go to parties and not hang out, and hug their friends and be able to see their families and relatives and everything. Unfortunately, now is not the time to not keep an eye on that. Okay. We do know that just over in Onondaga County, the next county to the west of us, Most of that county and some of Oswego County are under New York State yellow cautionary alert. Okay. And with winter coming, it's going to get even worse. Here in Cazenovia and in Madison County, we have to stay vigilant. Okay, we have fewer people demographically, but we are susceptible to the same virulent disease of novel coronavirus.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all of that. Dara, what would you like our viewers to know?
I saw this or listened this morning to The Daily, which is a podcast that New York Times puts out. And they were putting out little speeches that the French President Macron and the Prime Minister in Germany, Angela Merkel, they started with saying, this is difficult. This is difficult for all of us, right? I'm 40, almost 46. I have teenagers. They are very, this is disconcerting, right? What are we doing here? We're walking around in masks for the first time ever. You know, I used to see Asian students on SU's campus and think, wow, they're wearing a mask. But that was because of the bird flu. Do you remember?
Yes.
What was that called? Bird flu?
H1N1?
H1N1. So, and then they never lost it. Like they would always wear that mask on campus. Now here we are. We're all wearing masks all the time. You know, I'm starting to even recognize people with their masks on, which is saying something, because at first, you know, you couldn't see anybody's face anywhere. It is difficult because this is a once in a century pandemic. None of us have ever been through this before, right? There was like one person who had been through the 1918 flu and then died of COVID this past year. One person, right? Because you'd have to be like 100 years old. So the next thing that they said is that we have to make sure that our essential workers are taken care of. When you have a bunch of checkout kids at Wegmans, or you have all the people who work in the hospitals, it is our responsibility as people who don't work in those fields to remember that they are essential and not expendable. We can't lose all of our hospital workers to this deadly disease. We won't have anyone to take care of us. The next thing that they said is that the main reason that we would make the sacrifices that we are making right now is not only to keep each other safe, but it's good for everyone if the kids are in school. If the kids can't go to school, we have failed. This is part of the reason that I was so upset about the Madison County Sheriff's announcement, is because if everybody just decides to go to Thanksgiving because they want to have turkey and watch football together, and I know that Phillip loves football. So I don't know about turkey. Whatever. But just because you want to be with people doesn't give you the excuse to not allow our children to go back to school, because right now the kids just went on quarantine or like on isolation for the high school. They're expected to go back to school November 30th, the Monday after Thanksgiving. And I was like, well, no way, because we're going to have to see, here's Thanksgiving, add on 2 weeks, there goes Madison County, right into the orange zone, right into the red zone. Who knows? Because it is our responsibility, again, as thinking humans, to create the safest space for everyone that we can. Just being safe, just being aware, right? And awareness tells me, and the things that I have read tells me, that unless I can stay 6 feet away from everyone else in the room with a mask on, and even then, maybe you shouldn't be indoors with those people, that it is not the right time to travel. It's not the right time to have a 30-person Thanksgiving dinner. It is not the right time this year to open that can of worms. If we do, we will have empty chairs at the dinner table next year. Whether it's our elderly, whether it's, someone who's middle-aged who has a pre-existing condition, whether it's a person who's totally healthy before this happened. And there are people who are contracting this disease who live and have serious issues after. So you, me, all of us, we are not out of the weeds until there's a vaccine that has been proven and we all get it. It's going to make for a little bit long time, but when it's over, you won't see another pandemic, most likely, in your lifetime. So just hang on. Hang on till we can all be safe together. Please.
Yes, thank you, Dara and Phillip, on your perspective of our COVID. Just like Phillip, you mentioned that some individuals, we all are going through COVID. Yes, that is a reality, that is a fact. But depending on our social economic status, depending on our income, we are all going through it differently. Depending on our privilege, do we have insurance? Do we not have insurance? Can I work from home, or am I an essential worker, or am I a migrant worker who doesn't have that option, right? And so I do want to thank you both for those perspectives, and remind our viewers that everyone is allowed to have their own perspective, validate that perspective, and they might look different from you. And that's why they're experiencing COVID, experiencing the election differently, and maybe perhaps interpreting policies from Governor Cuomo or from the county local officials differently because it impacts them differently. And so I just want to thank you both for your honest perspectives, and just letting our students, faculty, staff, and residents of Cazenovia, and whomever also is watching, how you're living through it, and how you're living through the past 4 years, and how you hope to live the next 4 years with hope, with bringing back respect, dignity. And I thank you both for bringing up immigration and our children who are in cages and who have not found their parents yet. I do appreciate that from a Latina perspective, but also, like I mentioned, undocumented is something that's a passion of mine. So I appreciate that for y'all. And so I do want to thank any of our viewers who have been chatting with us. Unfortunately, due to the laptop I have, I'm not able to see the chat. So if we have anyone in the chat, thank you so much. We hopefully can connect with you after the stream and answer any questions, or even allow our guests to see the comments you have made. So I apologize that I don't have anything to see if any comments weren't. If there's no comments now, please, whomever is watching this, please comment. We'd like to know your perspective. We'd like to know your lens. We'd like to know, perhaps, if you're willing to let us know your experience of why you think certain ways. We definitely want these dialogues to bring that conversation. A lot of people say election or racism dialogues are awkward and hard. Unfortunately, for some people of color, it's not. It's a daily, it's a every second, every minute thing. I can speak for just myself. I can't speak for all people of color, but I live it every minute. And so I'm thinking about it, and I want to continue these conversations because I get to learn the other perspective, as well as hopefully I get to educate them on my perspective. And so I thank you again, Dara and Phillip, for bringing that. I thank you for having Anti-Racism Coalition here at CAS. Not many towns, villages, or cities have that. And so I think that Cazenovia is definitely going to be impacted in a positive way. And like I said, y'all have supported me thus far, and I've only been a resident since mid-September. So I am so thankful, and truly thank you for giving us your time tonight and educating us on the aspects of the election and COVID. Is there anything else you'd like to let our viewers know, or I could definitely just close us out?
I've got one thing that I was
Sure.
just thinking about. I want to give a quick shout out to two retired professors at CAS, Eric Boyer in English, and in social sciences and history, Tim McLaughlin. The two of them, they were two of my favorites. And in 1994, we threw around the idea of a philosopher, a German philosopher from the 19th century, Immanuel Kant. And it was the idea of utilitarianism. And it really segues really into whether or not you do for yourself, or does the institution of government have an obligation to the greater good? And who is impacted by that? We've just established, or at least I think most of us people of color know that people of color typically are the disenfranchised and most impacted by adverse situations. And if you make the decision to be reckless, to be selfish, and to have one of these large gatherings in the midst of a global pandemic, acting like it's business as usual, it's not. It is. This requires emergency management, crisis management. We cannot operate like things are as usual. Okay, we have to look at the greater good. That means wearing our mask on campus. It means socially distancing both in class, on campus, and in the village. It means being cognizant of this invisible, virulent agent all around us. And unfortunately, it's going to get worse before we get to a place where we can be inoculated in some way from this thing. So by protecting those around you, you're protecting the greater good. And by not doing that, you are, in effect, becoming a personal individual agent. And there's nothing wrong with individuality, but in times, in times of stress, you have to look out for the bigger picture. You really do. Cicero once said quite the opposite. Cicero was a lawyer and a statesman during the time of Caesar. And he once said, in times of war, the law falls silent. The Madison County Sheriff, Todd Hood, reminds me of that. Look up on Google Cicero and see what happened to him. Cicero was killed by agents of Mark Antony. So we can always find something in history or philosophy that really resonates with us today. And that might be a little on the arcane side, but I just want to leave our viewers with the fact that we have to take care of each other, okay? No one, as they say, and I certainly didn't come up with it, lives in a vacuum. And that's not any more crucial than now. We have to depend on each other. So please, let's take care of each other.
Thank you so much for that.
Dara? Yeah, I have to add something, Phillip. Ken sent me this quote. Ken is my husband, from Isaac Asimov. He says, "There's a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there always has been. the strain of anti-intellectualism, and I'm speaking to college students right now, right, and professors. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. That my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. It is not true, especially when it comes to science, right? That's what that means. So when we have leaders who we trust, who are being led by the top virologists and epidemiologists, then we can trust in what they say. The last 4 years have made people not trust their leaders. Consider that. That's all I'm gonna say. There you go.
Well, thank you so much, and love the both quotes on that. And I will close this out with thank you to our viewers, and hopefully y'all are subscribed to more dialogues post-election are coming in a couple weeks. So thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, Katiuska. Bye, Peter. Bye, Phillip. I was a peace and Phillip at the same time.